por favor.
Recording in progress.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. Ok, pues buenas tardes a todos. Gracias a los que nos acompañan aquí en Zoom y los que nos estén siguiendo por YouTube y Facebook. Bueno, es la tercera sesión de nuestro seminario. El día de hoy contamos con la presencia de Charles Reiss de la Universidad de Concordia en Montreal. Y bueno, a partir de este momento voy a presentar a Charles en inglés y después le voy a dar la palabra. Cualquier duda, por favor, pueden ir escribiéndola en el chat y se va a leer una vez que Charles termine su exposición. Okay, pues muchas gracias. Okay, so let's start. Charles Reiss is an associate professor at Concordia University in Montreal, where he's also a founding member of the Concordia Center for Cognitive Science. His academic foundation began with a BA in mathematics from Swarthmore College, followed by his advanced studies at Harvard University, where he earned an MA in linguistics and a PhD. His research heavily focuses on theoretical linguistics, particularly phonology, historical linguistics, and cognitive science. And he's a founder and advocating for a formal rule-based approach to the human language faculty, as seen in his co-authored books, some of them including the Phonological and I Language, an introduction to linguistics as cognitive science. And well, he has a lot of papers, free for all in academia.edu, in Lingvos. And well, he's a great teacher. I met him the last summer. Well, some of us have a little seminar with him. We are trying to explore the model of logical phonology. And well, we thank you, Charles, for being here with us. It's a pleasure. Please go.
Thank you, Carlos. So if you can't hear me, just turn on your microphone and tell me, or if I'm out of the camera, just don't hesitate to interrupt me. And for content questions as well, I'd rather, we're a small group, so don't hesitate. Just turn your mic on and start talking. Okay. So I've been meeting with Francisco and Adela and Carlos for since the summer, and so they have seen a lot more of this stuff. I've been working with Kyle Gorman a lot, and we keep discovering new little things. And so I hope I can present this in a way that's coherent. But I'd like to just know about the background of some of the other people here who I haven't met before. So I guess everybody is a phonologist. Is that fair to say that everyone's a phonologist?
Yeah, we have
Okay.
Hugo. He's also a phonologist. He works with Mazatec. Verónica Reyes, she's a phonologist. She works with Tepehuano and Nahuatl. We have Mario Luna. He works with Zapotec. And Herrera, I think, is Mario Chavez. He works with Zapotec also in Mazatec. He's my mentor. So yeah, we are all phonologists here. Yeah.
Okay, great. So since I have an hour and a half, I figured I'll try to squeeze a lot of stuff in. And at the very end, I tried to actually, I have to say, I started thinking about certain things after my last meeting with Adela and Francisco and Carlos. Hopefully, I'll be able to talk about it at the end, and it'll be something that I think would be useful for you people who work on lots of languages. I'm not very good at working on languages. I tend to work on simple things. But let's just get started. If I'm going too slow, or it's too boring, or too fast, or you want me to go over something, just don't hesitate. Let's just have a good time. I'd rather that everybody gets something out of this. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some big picture stuff, and then I'll get to some actual language stuff, and we'll mix it up. Okay. So I just started with this quotation from one of my teachers, Sam Epstein, who unfortunately died fairly young a few years ago. And he was the kind of person who would work in syntax on like, how do you define C command? Or what's more basic, C command or domination in a syntactic tree? And his reaction when people would work on things like weak crossover and all these complicated syntactic structures, he would say, we don't even know the structure of John left, a sentence, a simple sentence like John left. Why are we trying to do these complicated things? Let's look at these simple things. We don't even know how to draw the tree for John left. And so I really liked that attitude. And another version of this, today I went and looked for the original Spanish because I've of course read it in English. Santiago Ramon y Cajal, he's one of the founders of neuroscience, and he's got this great little book. It has a different name in Spanish, but basically saying there's no little problems, there's no small problems, there's just big problems that we don't understand. And so I have this tendency to focus on really, really simple things. And try to show that I can maybe look at complicated stuff and reduce it to simple stuff so that we can understand the apparently complicated stuff. And most of what I've been working on in this approach that I call logical phonology, especially with Kyle Gorman, is to take things that people have said is not pure phonology, that involves lexical exceptions or morphological conditioning, and to show that actually we can reduce it to pure narrow phonology, without referring to morpheme boundaries, without referring to lexical, morphological strata, and so on. And so that's what I've been spending, that's all I did in the summer course with you guys. And that's what all the papers we've been posting have been about. After our last meeting, I started thinking about, how this is not very useful when you're working on a language with, things like process morphemes or whatever, where there's clear morphosyntactic conditioning. So at the very end, if we have time, I'll give you my latest thoughts about how we might be able to expand into this domain. And it's thanks to my inspiration from our conversations that led me there. But I'm just at the very beginning of that. So maybe we'll think about it together. Okay. I was having some computer problems today. Okay. So just to make you feel better, in case you're worried I'm going to rant philosophically for a while, this is where I'm heading towards. This would kind of be the highlight. I think maybe some of you have seen this before. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's from a grammar of Blackfoot, which is an Algonquin language. And in this language, there's some Ks become affricates, x before some Is. And so here, you get this S here that basically is due to the K before the I. And France, the author of the book, he says, we call this breaking of K. But for any morpheme which begins with an I, we need to know whether that I is a breaking I or not. So some I's cause this process and some I's don't cause this process. Okay, so there's exceptional I's and there's I's that trigger the rule. And then it gets worse because if you go to the last bullet, it turns out that some Ks don't undergo this affrication process. They stay as a K. So it says that the K of the second person prefix is always impervious to breaking. It doesn't undergo breaking. So you have exceptional triggers. Some I's trigger it and some I's don't. And you have exceptional undergoers. Some Ks undergo it and some Ks don't. So we're going to take a long route to, this, you read this and you're like, okay, it's a mess. It's like Latinate morphology in English, or it's just exceptions and lexical exceptions or morphological strata or something like that. And what I'm going to try to do is build up a model that will let us treat Blackfoot as pure phonology. Okay, so that's where we're going, but we're going to take a long route. Okay, so I see your lecture series is called New Paradigms in Phonology or something like that. So I said, you might be wondering, why should you seek a new paradigm? And, you're chugging along. I don't know do any of you work in optimality theory? Some of you do? Okay. Happily chugging along in optimality theory, you might say, why do I need this new approach? I've got my approach. And I just, since the optimality theory is, the dominant framework for it, has been basically since I started my thesis, and I was always kind of, I played around with it, but I'm going to try to convince you that we've got something better to offer, but I think it's important that when you talk about these things, that you do it fairly. You don't just reject an approach based on bad reasoning. So there's a lot of attractive things about optimality theory. There are some bad arguments against optimality theory that we shouldn't be fooled by. I think that there's some serious problems, and I'll try to make the substance-free logical phonology that we're going to focus on seem attractive by comparison to optimality theory, by comparison to old-fashioned rule-based phonology. Just try to convince you that we've got something new that maybe is worth pursuing. Okay, so just because, like I said, it's useful to understand these systems and not just use them as toys, right? We're trying to do science. So one of the things, I got a lot of these ideas came from Mark Hale, who was my supervisor and mentor. A really simple idea about optimality theory is, if you're doing rule-based phonology and you're faced with English go, walk, walked, and go, went, how do you know that you can't derive went from go plus past tense de, right? We don't have a theory of that, right? Maybe there's some crazy sequence of rules that could get you from go, de, to went. But optimality theory, at least in principle, with a finite, if you use classical optimality theory with a finite number of constraints and a finite number of rankings, it's probably the case that there's no ranking that's going to be able to get you the alternation between go and went as a phonological process, right? So it's a closed system in that sense, which is a nice property. Nowadays, it's hard to talk about this because there's so many versions of optimality theory, and people seem to kind of make up constraints as they go along. But originally, optimality theory was strongly nativist, right? If you have constraints like star-voiced coda, well, if you have innate constraints that refer to voicing and codas, then you must have innate features or innate structures like codas. And I think that's good. I think that the old arguments for innate features that Chomsky and Halle accepted are a good thing. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I think I was so happy when I came up with this example that I'll force it on you. I think maybe some of us have seen this already, but the idea that the features can't actually be learned. They're not in the signal. So my standard way of discussing this is to ask everybody to raise their arm. So I can't see you. Most of you have your cameras off. I can't see you. Are you raising your arms? Yes. Can you see each other? Good, good, good. So Veronica, I can see you raising your arm now. Now put your arm down. Okay. Did you just do the same thing twice? You put it up and then you put it down. It's two different things, right? You agree. Okay. When we look at phonetics, we actually treat doing opposite things as the same thing. So this is, if you're familiar with some basic phonetics, the so-called velar pinch. So this would be a syllable like ak, like this, aka, ak, where the third formant and the second formant come together as you approach the consonant, the velar closure. So it's sometimes called the velar pinch because the two formants pinch together, right? And it's also called the velar pinch if you have a syllable like ka. The velar pinch is going in the opposite direction. It's unpinching, right? So you start, the third and second formants start close together, and then they spread apart. So a Martian seeing you raise your arm and lowering your arm won't say, oh, you just did the same thing twice. And a Martian seeing your tongue movements or seeing your formants going together versus spreading apart would never say, you just did the same thing twice. But a phonologist would say, oh, you just did the same thing twice. You just realized the feature plus velar, right? And so the idea is that the only reason these both count as velar is because we are built in such a way that our speech perception systems is such that it treats these as identical. It treats them both as manifestations of plus velar, but that's not out there in the world. That's a property of humans. because a Martian wouldn't see it that way. It's just as ridiculous as raising your arm and lowering your arm being the same thing. So I mean, it's things like this that make me, this paper I mentioned by Chomsky and Halley, Chomsky and Halley, 1965. There's some long footnotes about this kind of thing, and I think they're very convincing, even though it's very unfashionable to believe in innate features these days. So I like that about classical OT. Innate constraints implies innate features. There's some bad arguments against OT, like people say, yeah, there's an infinite candidate set. How could that be a model of speech? How can you sift through the infinite candidate set and choose the best candidate? But I think it's pretty obvious that we can do things like that. Like if you know what everybody knows what is a prime number, like 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, right? A number that can't be divided by anything but itself or one. If I ask you, there's an infinite number of prime numbers. If I ask you, what's the smallest prime number greater than 20? And you could probably come up with that. 20 is not prime. 21 is 3 times 7. 22 is 2 times 11. 23 is prime. How did you search that infinite set of primes and find the smallest one above 20? It was easy. And the reason it's easy is because the number line is ordered, right? They go from smaller to bigger to bigger to bigger to bigger. So the idea is in optimality theory, the way I understand it is if inserting a K is going to make you is going to be bad and going to make you not be a winner, then inserting 4Ks or 8Ks or 11Ks is also going to be worse. So there's some structure to the candidate set. So we don't want to just reject the idea that we can select a member of an infinite set that meets certain criteria. So I find that that's a bad argument against OT. Another bad argument is that there's too many versions. Everybody has their own version. I think that's also a bad argument because everybody's trying their best, and maybe maybe you'll be the one to come up with the best version. So that's not an argument. The fact that there's disagreement is not an argument against it. So my more serious issues with OT have to do with what I call the substance abuse or the concern with markedness. I feel like it recapitulates or repeats a lot of phonetic stuff, a lot of phonetic facts about perception and production in the phonology, and you don't want to do that. And there's really kind of anything goes with constraints. So for me, I find it shocking when people have constraints that refer in this derivation to what's going on in another derivation, right? These kind of paradigm uniformity constraints, which are really, really powerful, but they get added to the theory without any discussion. And they kind of imply that everything's being derived in parallel. I also think that the idea of the factorial typology doesn't really make sense for reasons that we'll get into in a moment or two. And another idea I had was, which I don't know if it's appealing to you, but I find that the whole approach of constraint satisfaction was developed for artifacts, for things like, we'll see in a moment, but natural objects. If we think of language as a natural object, I don't think that constraint satisfaction is an insightful way to look at these, but we'll go into more detail on these things. So, all right, so I'm going to rant a little bit about constraints because I think that people just take the idea for granted, and so I'm part of my goal is to challenge you a little bit, and especially when you see what we're going to do in logical phonology, I want you to compare it to what gets taken for granted, right? Why is it really new what we're proposing? So the idea, the kind of the conventional wisdom in phonology is that the phonology somehow repairs ill-formed representations or marked representations or even pathological representations or complex representations, that somehow the phonology's job is to simplify things. So here's some random quotes. Final vowel deletion cannot create bad syllables in surface forms. Epenthesis exists to eliminate the bad syllables. Moira Yip, phonological computation has to cure a condition. She literally talks about a condition and a cure, like very pathological sounding. Prince and Smolensky said that phonology has principles of well-formedness, the laws that drive it. And that the grammar has to somehow make things better or harmonic or more optimal. This is, a long time before optimality theory. There was this theory of repair strategies that Carole Paradis and some of her colleagues worked on, that the phonological rules were repairing bad representations. And there's this book on output-driven phonology by Paul Tesar, that the phonology is somehow driven by what the output is. And I find this kind of a surprising idea because in classical rule-based phonology, the output doesn't really exist, right? It's just an ephemeral, a momentary, it's in short-term memory, right? Output is in short-term memory. You have your underlying forms, you have your rules that do a derivation, but the output doesn't stick around. So I find it kind of strange to think that this fleeting representation is what's driving phonology. And I think it's all kind of a kind of teleological notion, like driven by goal-driven, which in other sciences has been kind of eliminated. So there are these constraints. I think Edward Fleming at MIT, he introduced these maintain contrast constraints, that you have a process that might take place, but you avoid it taking place in order to maintain a contrast to avoid homophony. So it's very functionalist, right? That the idea is the grammar wants to avoid homophony, or that the obligatory contour principle exists to cure a condition that's somehow bad. Okay, so my view of grammars is that they don't have goals or aims or motivations, and this is just, like the idea of teleology is an old idea. Aristotle thought that lanterns shine for the purpose of people not stumbling, as if that's what drove a lantern to shine. And it's the teleology built into a lot of phonology, not just optimality theory, I think is of the same sort. It's kind of, it's been driven out of biology for the most part, not completely, but we got to be aware of this stuff. Your grammar doesn't care if you stumble. Your grammar doesn't care if you're misunderstood. Your grammar doesn't care about anything. It's just a grammar. Okay, so there's no why. There's no why to these things. That's just the way it is. Grammars are the way they are. They don't care about communication. Grammars are terrible for communication. We have neutralization. We have structural ambiguity. We have lexical ambiguity. Okay. So I tend to take the position of Morris Halle, which says language is not in its essence a means for transmitting information. We use it for that, but it's not built for that. It's got lots of ambiguity and redundancy as well as other properties that are obviously undesirable in a good communication code. So Morris wrote this in 1975, and I knew him when I was a graduate student. He once told me that he spent 10 years working on information theoretic approaches to phonology. He was trained as an engineer, and in the 50s, information theory was very popular. He said, I wasted a decade of my life. So I went with my wife to Venice for the Going Romance conference, and it was interesting because one of the few phonology talks there was an information theoretic approach to phonology. So not everybody's convinced by Morris Halle, but I am. So here's another argument against constraints and the idea of repairing representations. We have this impossible triangle, right? This could not be a physical object. I'm kind of bad visually, but I think you can just see that this could not exist. I won't try to explain why, but you couldn't build something of this shape. But we see that it's an impossible object, and our visual system doesn't have any desire or motivation, or it's not forced to repair it and make it look like a real object, right? There's this mismatch between our visual representation and what's out there in the world. What could be out there in the world? And tough luck, we don't repair it. Same with this Escher, MC Escher print, where the staircase seems to be going up forever, right? Everybody's walking upstairs, but it couldn't always be ascending. So we have these visual representations that correspond to things that can't exist in the world. Why would we think that the cognitive systems try to repair, voiced codas. It doesn't. I don't see the appeal of that approach. So, the notion of ill-formedness or markedness, relative or absolute, seems to me to be unfounded. And coming back to something I mentioned before, if you play Sudoku, I actually don't know the actual rules, or the traveling salesman problem, or about software programs that schedule, classrooms and teachers and make sure that there's no conflicts. All of these systems are best modeled with constraint satisfaction. But you notice Sudoku is a game made up by people. The traveling salesman problem can be applied to like wiring transistors, scheduling classrooms. It's an artifact, right? But human language, if we think of it as a natural object, as Chomsky suggests we do, there's no reason why we should model it with constraint satisfaction models. Those don't seem to be used in science in general. Another problem with constraints is that you can only learn them by negative evidence. If you're told this cannot occur, this is ungrammatical. But it's well known in the acquisition literature that children don't get much negative evidence and they tend to ignore it. And even if they wanted to use it, they wouldn't know exactly what's being corrected, right? So because the constraint, tomorrow you could find the thing that you thought was not allowed. So constraints can't be learned by positive evidence. They can't be learned just by a child observing what's around them, because maybe tomorrow they'll find something that violates the constraint. So if the constraints can't be learned, they have to all be built into universal grammar. And you don't want universal grammar to have a lot of stuff in it. You want it to be pared down, very austere. And our logical phonology, UG, is very austere. Am I talking too fast? It's okay. All right. And any questions, any comments? Maybe I'll go to the end of this section and then, okay. So forget OT for a while. If you talk about constraints on language, there's an infinite number. So I have this silly paper, this silly idea that I could say it's a constraint that no sentence literally contains a banana in it, right? Because bananas are not linguistic objects. It's universally valid, but we wouldn't want that to be part of the theory of grammar. There's an infinite number of true statements like this, but we don't want to build those into UG. And things look a little bit better when you look at optimality theory. But my feeling is that the soft constraints, the violable constraints of OT, reflect markedness prejudices. Like, lots of languages tend to devoice voiced obstruents in the coda. But why would you want to do what OT does, generate the infinite candidate set, and then filter it out? I mean, syntax used to do that, right? Move alpha, move anything anywhere. And then you filter out the results and you choose what works. But they got rid of that. Now what minimalism does is it just builds the illicit structures. It's a really constrained theory that just builds sentences that are sentences, and anything that's not a sentence can't get built. So in that sense, optimality theory is doing what syntax was doing 30 years ago. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's worth thinking about. So yeah, I'm pushing to accept this idea that language is a natural object. You don't have to repair stuff. Just think about a molecule. A molecule is not ill-formed or well-formed. It just is. If it's ill-formed, it's not a molecule. You could have a chemistry test with some kind of diagram that could never exist, and your teacher could say, "Is that a well-formed molecule?" And what they mean is, could that exist? But there are no ill-formed molecules in the world, and that's the idea I want to have about phonological structures. So the idea is just, your grammar gets combinations of morphemes, you map them to other representations, there's no repair. There's just the rules of grammar. So the grammar is just a function that maps one set of representations to other representations. Okay, I don't know, does anybody want to object or talk? Okay, let's go on. All right. Another reason I think I could ignore this next issue, but first of all, let me put up a funny picture. And second of all, I think it's important to make it explicit. It's hard to see how abstract we're being. So the section is called Assimilation and Household Pets. This idea that people and their pets start looking like each other. Well, here's an example. But that's not what I mean. You'll see what I mean by assimilation and household pets. Okay, so we tend to think that as phonologists, like our bread and butter is assimilation, right? It happens over and over and over and over again. And if we have something like, vowel harmony in Turkish, it's a kind of assimilation. And like every working phonologist has seen, zillions of cases of assimilation. And we kind of think that should be, the fact that it's so common should be an important part of phonological theory, but I'm kind of a naysayer. And so I don't think, and that the common stuff should be easy to account for in the model. And I mean, I used to believe this. It makes sense. I think almost everybody believes this, but I think it's ultimately wrong. Here's a quote from McCarthy. I call it the fetishization of assimilation. He says, the goal of phonology is the construction of a theory in which cross-linguistically common and well-established processes emerge from very simple combinations of the primitives of the theory, right? So if it happens a lot, it should be easy to describe it. So this is why feature geometry was so attractive, right? You wanted to have place assimilation. N assimilates to the place of a following consonant. You just draw one line from the place node of the next consonant to your N, and you're done with the rule, instead of listing a bunch of features. And so that seemed like a good idea. And I think that this is just patently false as soon as you start thinking about it, right? How do you count commonness, right? So the Big Bang, which led to the creation of our universe, I mean, maybe it happened many times, but let's say in our world, it happened once. And leaves fall off of trees every day. We don't want physics to be able to model, falling of leaves. That's a common design to account for falling leaves more than the Big Bang. Or do support. How do we even count something that's common? How many languages do you know that have do support? I mean, English, but that's not even one, if English takes over the world and nobody speaks any language and everybody has English do support, there would be, then everybody had do support. How do you count though? Everybody has their own internal language. Let's say the other perspective, let's say English is the only language with do support, let's say. Should it be really hard for the theory to account for? And what does it mean to be well established and common? And so I think this whole idea of of it being easy to account for something that we see a lot is kind of misguided. And what instead we want is something like this. We want to abstract away from all the phenomena we see: assimilation, dissimilation, palatalization, vowel harmony, whatever, and abstract from that welter, that confusion of descriptive complexity, some general principles that lets us make the particular rules expressible in very simple forms, right? Figure out what, and not worry about what's common and what's rare. Okay, so yeah. So let me keep complaining about assimilation now. Here's a nice assimilation rule. A becomes nasalized before an N, and let's just summarize this something like a vowel looks at the segment to its immediate right, and if it finds plus nasal on that segment, it copies that feature, right? That's assimilation. Somehow it's copying or agreeing or harmonizing or something like that. So this is like, the kind of rules we love to talk about. But if you, look around, you get rules like this too, right? You say something like the vowel searches to its immediate right, and if it finds plus nasal, the vowel becomes plus high. Right. And, it's probably, you might be stubborn and you might say, well, I think that means that N is plus high. And people do that all the time. And that's what I mean by they fetishize assimilation. They basically are desperate for every rule to be an assimilation rule. But it's really easy to get, did I skip a case? Oh yeah, so let's do something like this. I think I left this one out. What if you have E becomes I at the end of a word? The word boundary isn't plus I. Just so there's no way that the feature is coming from anywhere else in the environment. So what we need in the substance-free approach, all I mean by substance-free is that we have to have a way of saying something happens to an E before an N. And we got to figure out what's the range of possibilities that this change that this can uh, 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 these changes. Okay. And so that's what I mean by substance freeness, right? When you look for, what you look for and what happens can be unrelated. They're not the same. You look, see if there's a following nasal, and what you do, you might nasalize, you might raise, you might do something else. Okay. So how does this relate to coming back to household pets? Chomsky has this discussion of, he says, principles and parameters approach rejected the concept of rules and grammatical constructions entirely. There's no rule for forming relative clauses in Hindi or verb phrases. I mean, we talk about these things, but these categories get they're just, semi-formal ways of describing structures, but they're not really part of the theory anymore. The familiar grammatical constructions are taken to be taxonomic artifacts, useful for informal descriptions, but with no theoretical standing. They have something like the status of a terrestrial mammal or a household pet, right? So there's our household pet. A household pet, goldfish, turtle, dog, these are not a natural class. They're not a natural grouping in biology, right? And terrestrial mammals include wolves, rabbits, elephants. That's not a natural grouping. It's like, wolves and dogs might be a natural grouping, but not wolves, elephants, and rabbits. So the idea is that assimilation and vowel harmony and adjacency and all of these things might be like things like passive or relative clause. And we got to see beyond these taxonomic artifacts. And so we got to get some kind of more abstract way of looking at things. Okay. So I'm going to skip ahead because I'm taking too long. But I think that this approach should appeal to you guys working on lesser studied languages, right? And so yeah, I came up with this, this very trendy language in my university now, right? Everything has to be decolonialized, I guess. And so we're decolonizing universal grammar. We don't want to take the common and well-established processes, which maybe come from, better studied, well-attested languages. We want to get something that's abstract enough to be relevant to everybody. So I'm turning it into a political slogan, but there's nothing exotic about your languages. That's the idea. I mean, you already know that, of course. But I don't, since I don't work on languages like yours, I don't know how well my phonological intuitions, which, ended up, the people that built optimality theory, right? They're all trained by Morris Halle and his students, like I was. I was trained by one of his students. We just inherited his two intuitions about what's normal phonology, what's normal process. We got to get out of that. So this approach we're taking, the substance-free logical phonology approach, we take the internalist approach of Chomsky, substance-free in the sense that I just illustrated, and I'm going to try to show you what we mean by a minimalist, austere model. So a lot of this stuff is laid out in a couple of books. So I'm very lucky I wrote this book with Mark Hale, who's a historical linguist, and then this with Donna Isaac, who's a syntactician, and then the phonology textbook with Alan Bell, who's a semanticist. So I get to benefit from all these people who know lots of things that I don't know. And the spirit of what we're doing is found in these works, I think. And then, more recently, I've been doing a lot of work with Kyle Gorman, who's a phonologist and a computational linguist. He's got an appointment at Google and at CUNY Grad Center. And Veno Volanets, who was my colleague for a while at Concordia, he now went back to Croatia, and he's a phonetician. He's got a phonetics textbook coming out from MIT Press sometime this coming year. So, all right, here's what I mean by an austere model. we're basically deconstructing the arrow of phonological rules. We're saying it does too much. It can change segments, it can delete segments, it can insert segments, it can whatever. It can, you can insert segments or it can insert features. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide it into 3 operators. So one operator, which we call the unification operator, takes this is called this delta is missing a feature. It can insert a feature into a segment. We've got a subtraction operator that can take a fully specified segment and delete a feature. Sorry, I've tried to say add a feature or subtract a feature. And then insert I use for full segments. So this epsilon is our null segment symbol. And so this means segment phi, and this means delete the segment phi. And that's it. That's all we're not dealing with stress. We're not dealing with tone. We're not dealing with syllable structure right away. But for stuff that affects segments, that's all you need. And that's the whole model. So that's what I mean by austere. We're going to try to do, so even if we're wrong, we can do a lot of stuff. And I mean, I don't want to leave you with the impression that I think this is such a great, just look at this. Add a feature or subtract a feature. Of course, if you can get rid of features and stick features in, you can turn any segment into any other segment. But it's useful to be explicit about how we can break this stuff down. Okay, so let's start building our austere model. Nobody's interrupting me. Okay. All right. I'll try to, since we're a group of phonologists, I won't feel like I have to go too slow. So we're just going to assume that universal grammar provides a set of features and these values, and that you can combine these in the usual way. And I think everybody kind of believes this, but we're really, really making it an important part of our approach is that segments are sets in the mathematical set theoretic sense. And we're going to use all the basic things we know from set theory. So most of the time, I'm going to just say segments are sets. There's a little bit more like X slots that they're associated with, but that'll come up later. For now, just say segments are sets. And I'm going to stipulate this. And I know I'm not being complete, but for now, segments have to be consistent. So if a segment is plus F, it can't be minus F. If it has plus F as a member, the elements of the sets are things like plus F, like plus voiced, plus round, plus high, or minus voiced, minus high, minus round. So for now, I'm not worrying about affricates or contour tones or short diphthongs or anything like that. So segments have to be consistent, but they don't have to be complete. That means underspecification is allowed. And I'm gonna say a little bit about that. So imagine I just have 3 features. So here's a segment 1. It's plus F1, minus F2, plus F3. So, plus high, minus round, plus back. But here could be another segment that is whatever that was, minus round, I forget which order I did, minus round, minus back, but it has no value for high. So those are both possible segments. Now, OT people sometimes say, maybe we don't need underspecification. We're not sure we need it. They say that, but they use it all the time. So I'm going to ignore that objection. And if you look around, you'll see that they actually need it a lot. Like McCarthy talks about debuccalization as delinking, and he gives an OT analysis that's just, leaves things surface underspecified, not just underlying underspecification, but surface underspecification. Like some people use that for the Spanish dialects that have S to H, right, in coda. That's debuccalization. It just means you just get rid of the oral features. So even surface underspecification is allowed or is accepted in practice, whether or not they admit it. All right, so this is just a random factoid. An article in the New York Times said, according to a recent calculation, biologists and geologists said there's more living cells on Earth, like let's see, 10 to the 30th, a million, trillion, then there are stars in the universe or grains of sand in our planet. Okay, so there's a lot of living cells on Earth. I think once you have a combinatoric system that we need for language, those numbers aren't impressive at all. I'm going to try to convince you of that. So let's say that God built us with UG that only had 4 features. So we're going to start out low. So 4 is not a lot. If you've got 4 features, then you have 3 to the 4th. So 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, 81 possible segments. So for every segment, you could have plus F1, or it could be minus F1, or F1 could be absent, underspecified. Same for F2. So what that means is for each segment, you got 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, 3 to the 4th, or 81 possible choices. So there's 81 possible segments. So that's a possible segment. That's a possible segment that has no value for feature 1 or feature 4, and so on. So you have 81 segments, all the IPA characters or whatever. Let's say the IPA had 81 segments in it. Now take every possible segment inventory, every possible subset of those 81 segments, every possible subset of the IPA chart. And for each, let's say I want to take language 17 and see what is its inventory. Well, is segment 1 in there? Yes or no? Is segment 2 in there? Yes or no? Is segment 17 in there? Yes or no? Is segment 43 in there? Yes or no? So I have 81 yes or no questions. So there's 81, there's 2 to the 81st power possible segment inventories or languages. And remember, we've started with a UG that has only 4 features. And it turns out that's already 1,000 times more than the number of grains of sand on Earth. 2 to the 81 is 2.4 septillion. Okay. And if there's 20 features, that's a more reasonable number. I don't know. I don't care if there's 100, but let's say there's 20 features. Then you get 3 to the 20th possible segments, which is 2 to the, what is that? Is that a billion? 2 to the billionth power, more than 2 to the billionth power. I think it's like a few billion. But the number of particles in the universe is only 2 to the 285th power. So underspecification gives us something for nothing. It gives us a lot for nothing. We allow the absence, and it gives us beyond astronomical numbers. And my point about this is that this is going to happen to any theory that you choose, whether it's OT or binary feature system. At some point, the numbers get so great that every theory, every model is going to overgenerate in some sense. It's going to make for so many more possibilities than could ever be attested because you're way over the number of particles in the universe. So this is why I think the obsession in OT with factorial typology of matching what's out there is a bad idea. But the other nice thing about this is UG very plausible, right? This doesn't prove that UG exists, of course, but Chomsky makes this point that the less you attribute to genetic information, right, the UG, that makes the study of its evolution more feasible, right? Because you have a small UG. UG has 20 features and plus or minus. And you could get a lot of variety from that small UG. And pushing this even further, this gives us an argument against language-specific phonetics. We don't need language-specific phonetics because maybe the I in English and the I in Spanish and the I in French and the I in Catalan are actually featurally distinct. We got so many possibilities for featural distinction. Even with just 6 features, we can get 729 vowels in the vowel space. Nobody ever draws a diagram with 729 vowels, but if you really take underspecification seriously and put out all the possibilities, you get a big vowel space. It's actually pretty crowded. So why not exhaust what the math gives us for free before positing a language-specific phonetics module on top of phonology? Okay, so all right. Oops, what happened here? Something happened here. Oh, I got to the bad. Wait, I've been having all kinds of problems today. Okay, so we're actually gonna start doing some logical phonology, I hope. Yes. Okay. All right, here we go. So remember this idea that we're going to treat segments as sets of features. So when I say features, I typically mean valued features. Like, in one sense, back is a feature, but when I say feature, I usually mean plus back or minus back. Okay, so just let me be sloppy. All right, so when I say that this is a set, I mean that the segment U is the set plus syllabic, plus back, plus round, plus high, minus low, plus ATR. And I'm not going to worry if it's specified for all the features that we use for consonants or not. Let's not worry about that. And that's different from the vowel O, which is all the same features except that it's minus high. Okay, so that's, but they're sets, and that's why I put them in regular set theory brackets. Okay, and so since features are segments are sets, natural classes are sets of segments. Okay, so since segments are sets of features and natural classes are sets of segments, natural classes are sets of features. And we have to get used to manipulating these things. So these classes get constructed when we learn rules using basically intersection. Don't worry about generalized intersection. But the idea is that you can get a natural class description like this. You take the intersection of the segment U and the segment O, and that's going to give you the basic set theory notion of intersection gives you the elements or the features that are shared by these two, right? Plus syllabic is in both sets, plus back is in both sets, plus round is in both sets, plus high isn't in both, minus high isn't in both. And so we factor out high here. Minus low is in both, plus ATR is in both. So we get this set right here. And now what we need to do is take this set and turn it into a natural class description. And the way we do that is with this, I mean, this looks formal, but all this says is a natural class is a set of segments such that each segment is a superset of what we got by doing that intersection. It's just everything that contains these features. It's just a fancy way of saying that. Okay, so this gives us a formalization of the notion of natural class. And so what we're going to do is use, that's kind of ugly here with the set brackets with set brackets inside of it. So to make your lives easier, what we're going to do is we're going to just replace that ugly expression with this, with the square brackets. So square brackets are going to be natural classes. And so this means the set of all segments that are supersets of this set of features. And in the language we're looking at, it's just this set of segments. Okay, so these two expressions are equivalent. This is using a set of segment symbols, and this is using a set of sets of features. Any questions? We'll get some practice with this. Okay, so we can just get rid of that box there, which was just to show us that we factored something out. Okay, so now this is another thing that's so obvious when you realize it, but we're all very sloppy about it all the time, I think. We're using natural classes to build a theory of rules. And that was one of the legitimate complaints when OT started out is, hey, you guys doing rule-based phonology, you don't have a theory of rules. And the theory of rules that we want is one in which every rule is built around natural classes, that there's a rule formalism that we can use. So this object here is the segment U. This object here is the natural class that has only one member, the segment U. So that's the segment U that's here. This is the natural class that only has the segment U. Okay, so I'm going to obsess about these details, but you'll see why. Okay, so coming back to how we write rules, sometimes we informally write something like this. O and E become U and I respectively before a nasal. And if you think about it, like if we translate this into features, minus low vowels become high before nasal, we use the same brackets here. And that's kind of a problem because what this means is any member of this set of non-low vowels changes with respect to the feature gets the feature plus high. And this doesn't refer to a natural class. So what we do is we use the square brackets for natural classes and the curly brackets for a set of features that show what's changing. Okay, so they're different types. That's what it's called in set theory. They're type theoretically different. This is the natural class of non-low vowels undergoes this change before any member of the natural class of nasal segments. Okay. So it looks like it's just trivia, but we're aspiring to a theory of possible rules. And I mean, it's kind of shocking how necessary this is. Even a textbook like Bruce Hayes, he says, in most instances, rules refer to natural classes or a pervasive tendency. And that's much weaker than what Dave Oden says. It's the central claim that the targets and the environments of rules are natural classes defined intentionally via conjunctions of properties. So Oden is formalizing it and being concrete, and he's giving us a theory of rules that they have to refer to natural classes. Hayes is being kind of wishy-washy about it. And there's even a book called Mathematical Linguistics by Andras Kornai, which is basically takes Hayes' approach. Yeah, we expect rules to usually refer to natural classes, but we're proposing a theory of possible rules. But the changes are in terms of features, not in terms of natural classes. Okay, so just to get it, the idea is that this is not a rule. This couldn't be a rule. It's not just that I'm using this symbol here. This is an okay rule. This says the segment O undergoes this change before nasal. This says every member of this natural class, it only has one member, undergoes this change. Okay, so that's the difference. So we want to be careful about that. Okay, so equivalently, we could put it in natural class brackets. Now, when we're applying the rule to a particular case, right, this is a general function, right? So this says any member of this domain of targets. Well, let's apply it to a member of its domain. There's only one. This says apply the rule to O, and this is what happens. Okay, so we're being obsessive about this kind of stuff. All right, so now let's use it. Now we get to some interesting combinations of things where we have under specification. So now this language, the last language had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vowels, but it didn't have this underspecified vowel. What happens when we have an underspecified vowel like this? We've got the fully specified U, we've got the fully specified O, but now we have this capital U here, which is neither high, plus high, nor minus high. And what you notice is that the intersection of these two yields these two, right? If we intersect these two, we get this. And we used the intersection to build natural classes. And so what's happening is now the description of this segment is identical to the set that gets used to build a natural class. So now we've got this issue because we want to talk about if we take U and O, say, and we take the natural class, we say we get the set of segments such that each segment is a superset of this set of features here. But this, or written with square brackets, is this way. But now it doesn't only include U and O, it also includes capital U, because every segment is every set is a subset of itself. So this set of features is a subset of itself. That's a basic property of set theory. Okay. So this turns out to be our phonological Sawzall, our principle that we're going to use over and over again. So I'm going to kind of I'm going to skip all these little set theory discussions of these things and give you the punchline. Yeah, actually, let me do this. So here, now let's do it this way. Here's what we end up with. We end up with that if the language that we had that has these vowels, this is a possible natural class. U and O together with the underspecified one. You could have just U as a natural class, because if you take the features of U, U is a superset of U, and nothing else is, because it's fully specified. O is a superset of O. It's fully specified. But you cannot, there's some impossible natural classes. You cannot have this as a natural class because capital U is a superset of itself, but so is little u and little o. And you also can't have this as a natural class. And you can't have this as a natural class. In other words, given under specification, if an underspecified segment is in a class, all the more fully specified ones have to be in that class as well. So we have a theory of possible natural classes, which gives us a theory of possible rules. This is a problem noted since the 60s or maybe earlier by Lees, because there seem to be feature-filling rules. And a feature-filling rule is one that targets underspecified segments. It doesn't change things. So how are we going to have rules that refer to natural classes that cannot consist only of underspecified things and target them? Right? There's no way to target the unmarked member of a class. But we have a solution. Okay? This is our trick. We're going to use it all over and over again. So I asked ChatGPT to make me a picture of Morris Halle using a Sawzall. A Sawzall is a reciprocating saw that will chop up everything. And it gave me a picture of a random old man. And I said, okay, let's change it to a woman. And so this is my ChatGPT picture of somebody using a Sawzall to cut a metal bar. You can tell that it's AI generated because the saw is in the wrong place. There shouldn't be any sparks here. But a Sawzall, it's a reciprocating saw that'll chop up wood or metal, and it's great for demolition and destruction. So what we're going to do is use this idea that basically Lees, he worked on Turkish a lot. He basically formulated this, and it's what we've just looked at. If F and G are segments, and F is a subset of G, then no natural class can contain F but exclude G. So if a natural class contains capital U, it cannot contain little u. Sorry. If a natural class contains capital U, it must contain little u. It's very confusing. I screwed up all the time. Okay, and we're going to use this simple little statement here that Lees basically saw is going to get us all kinds of stuff. It's going to let us chop up all these things that people said were morphological conditioning and so on, and lexical exceptions, and we're going to turn it all into pure phonology just using the Sawzall, okay, of specificity. Okay, before we go on, I can't help but tell you about this. Once we have this notion of natural classes, what happens if we take, what happens if you take like the segment, I don't know, let's take something like, where's my mouse? My mouse is disappearing. What happens if you take the segment A and the segment P or something like that, and you do the intersection, right? Well, how many features do they share? Well, they don't share any, basically, right? Okay, they're both minus nasal, but basically they don't have much in common, right? So let's say that it's the empty set, right? So if you take the empty set, now what that means is that if you take build a natural class from this, you're going to get all the set of segments such that each one is a superset of the empty set. Now, you may remember when you did your basic set theory that the empty set is a subset of every other set. And so that means that the natural class that you get when you use no specification is this, which means the set of all segments. So we don't have to have something like the feature plus or minus segments. We can just denote the set of all segments with this cute little notation here. This means the set of all segments because there's no constraints on it. There's nothing that it has to have to be in that class. Okay, so David Shen figured this out. Actually, he figured it out. He told me, and then I forgot. And a few months later, I thought I figured it out, but luckily I remembered that it was all his idea. Okay. All right, one more piece of notation. I promise we'll get to some actual, is it true that it's 20 till? No, what time is it? Is that right? Two o'clock. Oh, wait. Oh, we only have, so we have 25 minutes. No, my iPad is, yeah, okay. All right. I gotta have to boogie. All right, so we need this notation. It's not part of the model. It's just a useful, piece of notation. A circle around a segment symbol means the list of features, not a set, that are in that segment. So I'm going to just give you an example. If I have this circle around a big capital U, it means the list of features in that capital U, whether or not the language has it. So here, a circle around a capital U is this list of features. we put that in brackets, and we just have the segment capital U. If we put it in natural class brackets, we get this natural class here that has U and O and capital U if there happens to be one in the language. Okay, so that's what the circle notation is. All right, finally, some actual phonology. All right, so all of this work was inspired by Sharon Inkelis. I call it the Inkelis is hammer because she uses it like it's so useful. She points to this Turkish data, and we're just going to assume that we believe everything here. And I think it's a good idea. And then we'll go into some more examples. So you have the word for art. You have sanat with a T, sanatlar with a T, sanatum with a T. Obviously, we would posit underlying T here. Then we have étude with a D, étudeler with a D, and étudum with a D. So whether it's in an onset or a coda, it has a D. Here it's onset or a coda, it's with a T. But then you get these other words that alternate, kanat, kanadum. And so this can't be a T that voices between vowels because this one doesn't. And it can't be a D that devoices in codas because this D doesn't devoice. And so what Sharon says is you need a three-way contrast. You need voiceless T, voice D, and underspecified capital D. And then she says what you do is you have feature filling. You could do it she does it in OT sometimes, she does it in rules. You have feature filling rules that stick in the right value if it's in an onset or a coda. And our problem is, how do we do this? Lise said it's hard. There's no way to point to capital D. So how do we point to the absence of a voicing value? And here's how we're going to do it. So a feature filling rule says capital D becomes voiced in onsets, it becomes voiceless in codas, and there's two problems. Remember, the target of a rule can't be a segment. It has to be a natural class. Remember, O becomes blah, blah, blah is not a rule. The singleton natural class containing only O, that can be the target. So there's no way to target this class without targeting these guys. So how do we avoid turning T to D in onsets and turning D to T in codas? And what we're going to do is deconstruct the arrow. Okay, so we're going to need something to add those features. And set union, which you're probably familiar with, is problematic because if we take something that's, say, plus cardinal minus voiced, and we do union with this set, what we're going to get is a set that has plus cardinal minus voice plus voice. That's inconsistent. And we said that our segments must be consistent. So union is problematic. So we adopted this thing called unification. There's whole schools of unification-based grammars like lexical functional grammar, head-driven phrase structure grammar. A lot of computational linguists use this stuff. We adopted this idea. Unification is what's called a partial operation. Union always gives you an output. If you union A and B, you get some set. But a unification can fail. And what we're going to do is we're going to say it fails if it gives you an inconsistent set. Okay, so if it gives you an inconsistent set, you get vacuous application. And so I'll show you some examples of this. So unification uses the square symbol instead of the rounded symbol of union. So here, plus F plus G unified with plus F, there's no change. It's vacuous because the union is vacuous. Here, we combine these two, there's no problem. These are compatible. Here, if we have plus F plus G and we try to unify with minus G, it's undefined because it would give us a conflict between plus and minus. And so by our semantics of phonological rules is such that we say, okay, then don't change that argument. It stays plus F plus G. So that's our big trick to that's what gives us feature filling rules. And we don't need any feature changing rules. So if we use this for Turkish in onsets, we say target this class. Now remember, this class has to consist of T, big D, and little d. So they all have to be targeted in the onset. If you take a D and you unify it with plus voiced, it's vacuous unification because it's already plus voiced. If you take a T and try to unify it with plus voiced, you get unification failure, and so you stick with a T. If you take a big D and unify it with plus voiced, you turn it into a D. And that's our whole trick. It looks like we've targeted just capital D. That's the only non-vacuous thing that happens. It looks like we've pointed to the nothingness there. But we did it by unification failure and vacuous unification. And so those two kinds of vacuous rule application allow us to affect only big D in onsets and not T. And the parallel reasoning works for devoicing in codas. We turn T to big D to T in coda, but we don't affect this one. It stays voiced. Okay, so that's our whole trick. It looks like we've targeted the absence of a feature, but we didn't target it. We stuck to our idea of rules referring to natural classes. Okay, so we got these two kinds of vacuous application. So that's one of our new operators that are used for instead of the arrow of phonological rules. Our next operator is set subtraction, which is very simple. You take one set, you subtract another set, and what you get is the set of elements that were in the first set but are not in the second set. So here, if we take ABC minus ABD, D is irrelevant because you can't subtract it, it's not here. B gets deleted, and A gets deleted as well. So you end up with this set here, right? So everything that's in the first set that's not in the second, did I get this right? Yeah, this is right. ABC minus ABD leaves you with just C. Okay, so if we have some features, this set of features minus plus voiced, you just get rid of plus voiced. So this is what you need for delinking, for debuccalization. You need to be able to remove features from segments. Like Arbore has this process where any glottalized segment becomes a glottal stop in coda. So you need something like this. A glottal segment, subtract all of the place features in coda. Okay? Or D, you could subtract plus voice from D, and lo and behold, you can get a capital D. That's how you can get a capital D. If you subtract minus voice from a D, you're stuck with the D because there's nothing to subtract. If you subtract both values, you get capital D because you've subtracted the feature that it has. Right? So this set here is not consistent, but that's okay because it's not a segment. It's just the change that the rule undergoes. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so we're doing okay. Once we have unification and subtraction, we can combine them to get feature changing processes. There's no feature changing rules. We do subtract and then unify, and I'll show you how it works. Russian has cvet, cveta, prut, pruda. So coda devoicing, D to T at the end of the word, say. So we might write something like, well, you have T, D, neutralization, D becomes T at the end of a word. But we don't do that because we don't have feature changing rules. What we do is we take our D, this is an old idea, subtract plus voiced and end up with capital D, then unify minus voiced in codas, and we get our change from D to T in 2 steps. So there's no feature changing rules, there are feature changing processes. But the nice thing is the theory is austere because we already need that subtraction to do debuccalization in Arbore. And we already need unification to give us the Turkish facts. So we get the Russian, very familiar kind of neutralization for free. It's just for free. There's no way you could not get Russian if you accept Arbore and Turkish. So now this idea that we're getting to is that just because things start to look more complex, it doesn't mean that the theory is going to get more complex. So here's a really nice example from Hungarian. Hungarian has the word for well. You've got kut, kudban, kutol, kutnak. So you have T and D forms. The word for tub, kad, kadban, katol, kadnak, you also get T and D forms. So if they both have a T form and a D form, you might think that they're the same, but that's not going to work because there's some environments where they behave differently. What's happening is before a B, they both become D. Before a T, they both become T, right? It's voicing assimilation. So it looks like a complicated mess, but we don't actually need anything new for this. what's going on is T sometimes becomes D and D sometimes becomes T. It looks confusing. Students will panic if you show them this. Traditionally, we would probably do something like this, right? We teach our students to say, okay, an obstruent becomes alpha voiced before an obstruent that's alpha voiced. But we're not allowed to do this because we're not allowed to do feature changing. So what we have to do is go through the two stages. So we have to first take our T's and D's, and then we subtract a voicing value, alpha voiced, if the following obstruent has the opposite value. So subtract alpha voiced before minus alpha voiced. And once we do that, we're going to have a bunch of capital D's around, T's and D's that become capital D's. And after that, we're going to have unification, which is going to say, now add the same voicing value as the following obstruent. So can you see this part of the diagram? Here is, oops, where's my, okay, here, oops, the bottom half, that's just Turkish. That's what we had in Turkish. We haven't added anything new, right? And so we haven't changed the theory at all, even though this looks complicated. And this part of the diagram here, that's just Russian. And, we could go in the other direction. That's also Russian, just with the pluses and the minuses changed. And so we haven't added anything new here either. And so we get this apparently more complicated phenomenon in Hungarian, but there's no way we could exclude it because we've accepted Arbore and Turkish. That gave us Russian. And then we get to Hungarian reciprocal neutralization for free. We don't have to add anything new. That's what I mean by, building up an austere model. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so here's a few more examples just to show you how useful this is. So Jose Walda has this discussion of a Basque dialect where he says A raises to E when there's a high vowel in the preceding syllable. And then there's all these exceptions, and he assumes that the exceptions must belong to different morphological strata. He wants to make there be, all kinds of complicated morphological structure involved in this to account for the exceptions. But the exceptions are totally incoherent as a class. Some auxiliary verbs undergo assimilation, others don't. Some auxiliary forms are like clitics and others aren't. Some derivational suffixes do it and some don't. Verbal suffixes sometimes do it, sometimes don't. A lot of conjugated forms it fails to apply. The forms that present the context, there's some that should, but they don't undergo the rule. It's just another irregularity that must be lexically marked. So either it's a morphological stratum or it's a lexical property. And the obvious solution, actually, I didn't give you the solution here. The obvious solution is that you've got A's, little a's, that are pre-specified. And when you try to make them become minus low, you can't. They don't unify with, because they're plus low, they don't unify with minus low. And then the ones that change, let's call them capital A, they're underspecified. So we can do the same thing we did for Turkish. We can do it here. And then, there's just so many of these. Kyle came up with a nice one where you've got, in Greek, you've got V's that alternate with a P. So V to P before S, V to P before S, V to P before S. But then you have other V's, which in the exact same environment, they stay as F's. And so the simple solution he came up with is, well, these ones are always fricatives. They stay as fricatives. They must be underlyingly plus continuant. Whereas these ones that alternate between a fricative and a stop, they're unspecified for continuant, and that's why they alternate. And so the rules, the same feature filling rule, will give us both. And so it's just case after. So here's the underlying forms. You've got a V that's plus continuant and a V that's underspecified. Don't worry about the F. And so we've got a full analysis here. So what we've been doing is, this is all Sharon Inglis's idea, that you've got segments that look like they should undergo a rule, but they don't. They're exceptions to a rule that seems to apply. And what she says is going on is that the ones where it doesn't apply, they're just more fully specified, and the rule is a feature filling rule. and you can't change the feature. You can only fill it in on the underspecified ones. So she kind of suggested, but she didn't really follow up on it. What about using underspecification on triggers? And so let me give you a quick example. Baro Inupiaq has three vowels, E, U, and A on the surface. But, and it causes, E causes palatalization. But sometimes, so strong E's, as they're called, are what we call catalytic. They trigger palatalization of a following cardinal, but there's some other I's that don't. They have a different historical source, but who cares about that? So here's the word iki. When you add this suffix to it, you get a palatalized lateral, but ini, you get an unpalatalized one. And you hear iki, give it a palatalized nasal or an unpalatalized one. And the idea is just simple, is that now here, this I is fully specified, and this I has to be missing some property, and so it doesn't trigger palatalization. So a more fully specified segment can be the trigger of a process, but the less specified one won't trigger the process. Okay? So we can give them different features. So there's the phonology, and we see this all over. Here's a simple metaphony case from an Italian dialect. High vowels like E and U cause raising here. So from the underlying mid vowel, you get a high vowel and a high vowel. So the masculine singular ending causes this, and the masculine plural ending causes this, but the feminine plural doesn't cause this to raise. Now you could just say, oh, well, it's a lexical property or something like that, but all you need to do is make this be featurely different. We just called it capital Y, unspecified for ATR. It's just a different vowel. So it's pure phonology. You don't have to refer to, it's not about singular, plural, masculine, feminine. It's just a different phonological vowel. All right, so back to Blackfoot. Remember, we have Ks that get Ks that break into X, and we have caused by I, but some I's don't cause it, and we have Ks that don't break. So I'm just going to show you a picture. We have things like this all over the place. We found an example in Finnish, but the idea is that you've got targets that don't change, right? The things that are fully specified, and you've got triggers that can't make the change. If you combine a weak trigger with a strong target, you're not going to get any effect. If you can take a strong trigger that has all the features it needs with a strong target that can't change, you won't get any effect. If you take a weak trigger that's lacking the feature it needs with something that could change, you're not going to get any effect. All the action is here, where you have a fully specified trigger with an underspecified mutable target. That's where you're going to get the action. And so that's what's going on in Blackfoot. We have capital K followed by I, little k followed by I, capital K followed by capital I, little k followed by capital I. So this is a fully specified I. It can cause a change on this, and you'll get a X. This is a fully specified, this is a fully specified I, so it's immutable, it's inalterable, it can't change, even though the I is a breaking I. Here's an I that's a non-breaking I, it's too weak. It can't change the capital K, so nothing happens. And here it's too weak, so it can't change the regular K because the regular K can't change anyway. So only one of the four combinations gives us the change. So that's how we deal with this. But it's all based on specificity of what the natural classes are. You can see the mutable segments are going to be a subset of the inalterable segments, and the quiescent or inert segments are going to be a subset of the ones that can cause a change, the catalytic ones. And so we can model this, don't worry about the Greek letters here. Segments get mapped through the phonology. If you have a little k is just going to come out as K. Here, big K is going to come out as K in some environments, but it's going to undergo breaking in other environments. And then you're going to have a fill-in rule that makes these big Ks merge with the other Ks. So we can get this just very complicated phenomenon just by noticing this specificity idea. Okay, I have to show you the Catalan because I just came up with this example a little while ago, and we have a few minutes. Okay, so we've done oops, I dropped my mouse. Sorry. We've done unification rules and subtraction rules, but we haven't done segment insertion and deletion rules. So there's a little surprise here on the segment insertion and deletion rules. So what we got to do is now I'm adding in the X slots. We're going to need to refer to these. This is a segment. This is like the vowel I. It's a set of features connected to an X slot. If we want to, it's important to note that we don't do deletion by removing all the features in a segment. Because if you remove all the features using subtraction rules, you get an empty set. And an empty set connected to an X slot is not the absence of a segment. It's the segment that has no features, maybe schwa or whatever your theory is, right? So the way you delete a segment is not by deleting all its features. You got to delete the whole thing. So the way you do a segment deletion rule is something like this. This says, take any member of the natural class of nasals and map it. We have a special arrow, map it to the empty segment symbol, say at the end of a word. If you want to insert something, actually, I'm going to skip the insertion rule because we don't need it. But this is a segment deletion rule. Now, remember the brackets. Here's some Catalan data. You might be familiar with this. It's kind of a standard textbook problem. You have bo, bons, bona, bones. You have n deleting word finally. Okay. And r deletes word finally as well. So you have cla, but clara. So n and r delete word finally. And in addition, you have r deletes before s, but n does not. Okay. So they both delete word finally. We're going to say that that's one process. And r deletes before s, that's another process. Now, there's complications. If you ever did this in a class, you know that there's some feeding or counterfeeding. I forget, counterfeeding, where you can get an N finally because it was protected by a D, right? So you have profund, profunda. Let's ignore that. We don't need it. But there are some N's that don't delete. And you have some R's that don't delete. But there's no D protecting this or a T protecting this. So you have non-deleting R's and N's. So let's just stick with N's. You've got N's that delete and N's that don't delete. We got to make them different. And you might be surprised to see that what I've done is I've made the ones that do not delete be the underspecified ones. I'm going to say that they're lacking lateral. Now that's kind of weird. Why is the one that has less specification the one that's more stable? It's completely counterintuitive. But can you see why it has to be that way? It has to be that way because I'm just going to give a simple case, is that I cannot do the other way because this could not be a natural class, but this could be a natural class. Right? I can make a natural class that refers to all the features of N, a singleton natural class. But I cannot make a singleton natural class with this. The natural class that contains this would have to contain N as well. And so it has to be the one that's partially specified that does not delete. So I like this because I'm kind of a contrarian, and it just gives us something that's completely unintuitive, but it purely follows from our notion of specificity. It follows from the set structure, set theory, and we know that we can't go by our intuitions. It's got to be like that. So this gives us, we have the R versus the capital R, the N versus the capital N, and we get this. This leads us to something that comes out of specificity. If some but not all X's delete in a phonological context, the X's that delete have to be more richly specified than those which do not. And that follows from specificity because you can refer to the specified ones, you can refer to the fully specified N's, but leave the underspecified ones out, but not vice versa. Okay, so we've got this all worked out, and we've got something for R as well. I'll stop there. Okay, I'm just going to get to the end where, okay, so I didn't actually have time to spell this out. But what I've been doing is trying to reduce, so that you don't have to say Catalan has no exceptions, actually, right? There's no lexical exceptions. It's just a matter of what segment is there, whether it's a fully specified N or a partially specified N. And then you have merger on the surface. But we don't have to have lexical exceptions. We didn't have to have morphological strata in Basque. We can do it all as pure narrow phonology. And that's what I've been focusing on because I like the simple stuff that Sam told me to focus on, Sam Epstein. I've begun working with Danyar Kasanov, a student at NYU, on cyclic phonology using LP. We have some English and Polish examples, but that's just beginning. But after talking to Adela and Carlos and Francisco a few weeks ago, and seeing lots of people have to work on languages where you've got all this morphosyntactically triggered phonological processes, let's call them that. And so what I think what we can do is we can help, even though I don't know how to do it. I don't know what it means to be morphosyntactically triggered. But the strategy that I would like to adopt is like be modular. Separate out the issue of what kind of changes can occur from how those changes are triggered. In other words, I think it's what Terenya has a process that to mark third person possession, you nasalize all the vowels, right? So if you say, okay, I'm going to assume that you nasalize all the vowels using the LP unification and subtraction and whatever, that's it. So I've got the phonological change covered. How you actually implement and trigger those things, that's hard. That's a good question. I don't know how it works, but we can break up those two questions. And then maybe we can say, if I can't model the change that's occurring, if you give me a Zapotec process and I can't model the change that we see using logical phonology, then maybe it's suppletion, or maybe it's something else, right? It's not just morphosyntactically triggered phonology. We can separate these two things. So that's what I was hoping for to get to this point. And then I found I didn't have time to write it up, but it'll be a review. Okay. So I came across an article on Welsh. So are you familiar with the Celtic mutations, where you have things like, okay, you have a place name like Bangor is in Wales, but if you say in Bangor, it comes out as, this is not formatted, Efangor or Evangor. So B becomes V after this preposition and in other morphosyntactic environments. So you have a BV alternation. But with foreign names like Berlin, you say in Berlin, it's always a B. So probably what I would do is I would say, okay, Berlin is stored with a B and Bangor is stored with a capital B that can undergo changes, right? So the one that's normal Welsh mutation. So the one that's alternating is partially specified. The soft mutation, like after the same segment of a G, is deletion. You end up deleting the segment. So if you get Geliger and E Eliger, so you have deletion of the initial consonant. But if you have a foreign name like Gabon, and you say in Gabon, the country, you don't get any mutation. And what I concluded from this is that in this case, the one that's alternating between G and 0 has to be, the one that's alternating between G and 0 has to be the underspecified one. Sorry, that's wrong. The one that's constantly G has to be the underspecified one. The one that's constantly B has to be the fully specified one. Segment deletion rules and unification rules. So I know that's not formatted well here, but I have no idea how to deal with the morphosyntactic triggering of mutation. But we get this kind of surprising place we're forced to. But I need to write it up and present it better next time. So I'll stop there. Sorry for going over.
No, it's okay. I don't know if someone has any questions for Charles. Right now is the moment to ask Francisco, Adela, Mario, Veronica. I think that some of other people has already did. So Hugo. Okay, no,
So
no.
those of you, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Those of you who've seen some of this stuff before, I don't remember what's new and what's not. The deletion, did we ever go over these deletion rules? Segment deletions?
I think so in
Yeah, I
NYI,
think,
right?
yeah, I can't remember because yeah. So I mean, so what do you think of the Catalan? I mean, is it clear what the claim is in Catalan?
Francisco, Adela, Mario, before I speak like always. Okay, to me, it's a well, it's a interesting consequence of what you have said before because we tend to think like in strength, right? Things that doesn't delete.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we should expect that, let's say, um, weak ends should be delayed, right? And yeah, for me, it's sound, but I yeah.
It's completely counterintuitive, but that's a part of also of the idea of substance freeness, right? Don't take our intuitions to be, like, obviously something that has less content should be more likely to disappear. Yeah, I'm trying to say, don't take that, don't go with your phonetic, overcome your phonetic intuitions because they might be misleading. That's uh, I gave an example to parallel this somewhere, like ellipsis in syntax, right? If you say, uh, John ate a pepperoni pizza and Mary ate one too, right? So you don't repeat pepperoni pizza, right? Um, uh, but if you say, uh, John ate a pepperoni pizza with extra cheese and mushrooms and spicy sauce, and Mary ate one too, right? Now, the thing that's been deleted has more stuff in it. And in fact, with elision, ellipsis like that, you're probably more likely to delete it the bigger it is, right? Because you don't want to repeat all that stuff, right? So I mean, it's just not common sense that things that are smaller or have less information are more likely to be lost or deleted than things that have a lot. It could be the opposite. So we got to be careful about what makes sense or is intuitive.
I don't know if okay, so I'm gonna start. I have already questioned you about archiphonemes and underspecified sets.
Sorry about what? What was the first word you said?
Underspecified
Uh,
sets, yeah.
okay.
And in the Konsuge from Trubetskoy, he never finished his morphophonological, let's say, work. However, in let's say in his ontology, you have phonemes, archiphonemes, and morphophonemes. And what I think it follows from your model is that we only have uh, phonemes and archiphonemes, let's say, but morphophonemes are pretty much um, there are no really morphophonemes. What we have is these two entities, and what we have are rules that operate through morphological process. Is that right? How I am?
Well,
Okay.
so okay, like most North Americans, I'm really badly educated on the history of. Oh, you guys are North Americans too. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Most further North Americans, or most maybe North America. I'm American, even though I work in Canada. I live in Canada, but we're really badly educated, typically on history of the field. So I remember a little while ago looking up archiphoneme, and I kind of understood the idea, but archiphonemes, I guess, to correct me if I'm wrong, they refers to this a set of segments, right?
yeah,
So they didn't really think about, at least the Americans, I think they thought about the archiphoneme as a set of if it's sometimes if there was a TD alternation, like in Turkish, they'd say the archiphoneme is the set T that contains T and D, right? So they didn't really think about it as a featural representation. So I just am sloppy about it because Sharon Inkelis calls her system archiphonemic under specification. And she says, Sharon Inglis is a great scholar and she's very careful about these kinds of things. She says it's not an exact parallel to what they meant by archiphoneme, but I'm going to call it archiphonemic representation, underrepresentation, because it's obvious where it gets its inspiration from. So I think it's really hard, to so if archiphonemes are sets of segments for Trubetskoy, then I guess it's hard to make. I mean, it's hard to make a direct comparison. So wait, so the and then the morphophonemes, what's their property?
The idea is that he really never developed as full, but what I could get is, for example, this alternation in English, electricity.
Oh,
Have that you have a morphophoneme that changed to S and all that
yeah.
stuff.
So do you notice? You notice like I put a little note there after we did Blackfoot. What I mean, I can't decide if I'm proud of this or ashamed of it. English is Blackfoot. You could make English be Blackfoot. You could say electricity. You could probably make it work by saying it's pure phonology,
Yeah.
right? It's just Blackfoot. And that might be good, that might be bad, but it's good if we at least understand. I mean, I think we expect our model to be able to do a lot of crazy. Since it's so primitive and the parts are so small, we expect that if we just combine things, we're going to be we could make electricity be. I tried to make an argument for this. Here's the argument I tried to make. If we have this bike share system I was telling you about before, and they have regular bikes and electric bikes. Not now, only when the weather is warmer. And a lot of people call the regular bikes acoustic bikes, like electric guitar, acoustic guitar. So, but if you want to ask somebody, are you gonna ride an electric bike? To me, it would be perfectly fine to say, are you electricing? Right? And I could say, and that could be because the ing suffix has an inert or a quiescent I that can't cause velar softening. Right, and so you could play around with it and make the ing have a inert or a quiescent I, but the ity has a catalytic I. So that's the whole idea, is how can we get rid of these morphophonemes and just do it by cleverly choosing our representations. And what's better? Is it better to have a list of things, a morpheme? Oh, an important point is related to what you Sharon Inglis, again, being very smart and very careful. She showed that the Turkish case can't be done in terms of just morphemes being exceptions. I had it in a footnote. Where's So, the idea of there we go. So you can see the footnote here. Does it show up? So you could say, okay, etude is the kind of root that doesn't undergo final devoicing, coda devoicing. And what Sharon showed is that you've got this word ejdat, and it's ejdat but ejdadum. So this stem final, this T alternates with a D. So that's got to be a capital D. But this this obstruent here, this j here, it stays voiced. So it has something, this is the j, but which works the same way. It's a voiced obstruent in coda. And so so you can't say that it's a property of etude that it just doesn't undergo coda devoicing, because this word here does undergo coda devoicing with the T, but it doesn't undergo it with the j. So this is a great piece of data for showing that you can't do it in terms of lexical exceptions, because it has both kinds. It has alternating Ds and non-alternating Ds. And that's the idea. That's the best thing to have. So I've got other examples from Turkish that are related. It kind of combines all this stuff. Let's see, what was it? Oops. Where we have Ks that delete and Ks that don't delete. So here we go. So this is, I skipped this part. You have a word like sokak, and in the nominative, you get sokak. But in the dative, when you add a suffix, you get sokaa. So this K here in bold, deleted, but only when you added a suffix. So here's what happens. You need to, what people said was, or what Kaparsky had said at some point was, K deletes between vowels, but only when you add another morpheme. Only when you add another morpheme. So this was given the name non-derived environment blocking. So why doesn't this K get deleted here? Because it's in a non-derived environment. It's in the lexicon. This K isn't between vowels, but then when you get it between vowels, it deletes. And so they said it's non-derived environment blocking. And the same thing here. Bebek, that deletes when you add a suffix. Guguk, this one's initial. This one doesn't delete because it's in a non-derived environment, but this one deletes, and so on. So there was this idea of non-derived environment blocking, and Sharon Inkelis is like, well, maybe we could do it with under specification, but I doubt it. It just seems like any attempt to do that would be far-fetched and uninsightful. And notice that's exactly what I did. I'm going to show you what I proposed. I said the K here is under specified K. The K that's at the end is fully specified. And what's getting deleted is a fully specified K between vowels. And so let me see, yeah. So you got Ks. Let's just look at the Ks. Under specified K is the ones that survive. Yeah, here okay. So this one here has to be fully specified. This one is going to turn out to be a capital K. And it's the thing we just did in Catalan. The underspecified ones are the ones that can survive. And then the ones that get deleted are the ones that are fully specified. And you might say, oh, you've cheated. You just chose the ones at the end of the morpheme to make them be fully specified and the other ones be unspecified. It's really morphological, but you're just opportunistically making it, saying that it's phonological. Well, it turns out that, oops, oh, I'm hitting the wrong button. There we go. It turns out that there are exceptions. So you have sokak, where you get soka, and that stem final K deleted because it was a fully specified K. But there's a word orak where the K stays. So this is just like what we saw in you can't say that it's morphological anymore. You can't say it's non-derived environment blocking because even when you put this in a derived environment, this one doesn't go. And so all you have to do is say, this is my capital K, fully specified K. So we get rid of this crazy idea of non-derived environment blocking, and we get rid of lexical exceptions, and we're getting this all for free because God gave us under specification for nothing. God gave us under specification. We just say, okay, you don't have to be complete. Segments don't have to be complete. And so we're not adding anything to the theory. We're simplifying the theory. We're just saying, just leave out some features. That's a segment too. So is that kind of related to what you were getting at, Carlos?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
Okay.
Okay, yeah, it's ontologically there is no difference. And now,
yeah,
I am obsessed with segments and phonemes, as you may already guess.
Yeah, that's good.
So, what is
But
a
yeah.
phoneme in your theory? Are underspecified sets phonemes, or we just talk about segments?
Yeah, well, I mean, the classical definition of a phoneme is, and versus morphophoneme. I mean, I think Maurice Halle in the Sound Pattern of Russian pointed out that the distinction is not important, right? It is, we don't need that. That had to do with. I mean, again, it depends on whether you're an American structuralist or a European structuralist, but you just want to have a grammar that makes sense, right? And so I don't know if are you familiar with the sound pattern of Russian, Morris's discussion? Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So, yeah. And so that, it had to do with bi-uniqueness, and why do you want to have bi-uniqueness? And he said, I once asked him, why did the structuralists insist on bi-uniqueness? And he just made a very insulting remark. And he said, I don't know why. They just decided it should be that way. And he didn't give me any good answer for it. So I think we shouldn't be hung up on it.
okay, okay. Well,
If you
that's
you know if you ever when I wrote this paper, research methods on armchair linguistics a few years ago. It's on LingBuzz, and I don't know. Yeah, I think you may have read it, but I started reading a bunch of old Chomsky stuff when I was writing that, like from the early 60s. And he goes through like every version of structuralism, and I can't even follow reading them, but somehow he's able to sort them all out, and their view of phonemes and their view of the different systematic phonemic stuff, and like he straightens them all out, describes them all, says why they're all bad. But it's just, I find it kind of overwhelming. And I'm just happy that the conclusion was, we don't need those ideas. We don't need bi-uniqueness. We don't need these.
yeah. Okay, and just a final question from my part because nobody else is talking. It is like also an obsession. Where is a point where we can propose allomorphy, and where? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, so that's the idea I was trying to get at the end, right? If uh, if let's say we have a way of understanding how morphosyntactic triggering works, but then we have a change that's impossible. So Kyle and I have been trying to say that polarity rules are don't exist in phonology. Like, I mean, but let's just say it's true that you can't have rules that change plus voice to minus voice and minus voice to plus voice in the same environment. And let's say you have that in a morphosyntactic environment, and we say, well, phonology can't do that, therefore that has to be allomorphy, real true suppletive allomorphy, or something that can't be done. But at least we have something to start, some place to start. We're saying we have a coherent theory of phonology. It's not about whether we're right or wrong, as if we can make an argument. If our theory of phonology, you won't let us do this, then uh, well, let me give you another example. I don't know, I've probably used this example with you before. Like if you have something like, it's from Lamba, an African language, a Bantu language. If you have something like uh, S becomes sh, this is one of my favorite examples, before I, and K becomes ch before I, right? We might tell our students, oh, okay, it's a palatalization process, right? Let's say this happens in some morphosyntactically triggered environment, let's say. And what I say is, this cannot be a single rule. And the reason is, I haven't given you enough data, but the reason is, it turns out that T stays as T before I. And the problem is, if you take S and you take the intersection of S with K, right? And then you make a natural class out of what you get from that. You don't care about carnal versus velar. You don't care about stop versus fricative. And so whatever natural class you get, it's going to contain S, it's going to contain T, K, but it's also going to contain T. And I don't know what else. Maybe it'll contain X if there is one, right? But anyway, it's impossible to have a single rule that, in our theory, right? Nobody else gets this. We get it. It's impossible to have a rule that targets S and K without targeting T. And so if you have a process like this and you want to treat it as one process, it can't be phonological, right? It's impossible. I mean, you could have a Duke of York derivation, you could have, other stuff, but you can't just say that it's a rule. This is, and this is where this comes back to that idea of, let's get rid of our taxonomic artifacts, because we feel like we say, oh, it's palatalization and we're done. That doesn't explain anything. It cannot, in our system, it is impossible for this to be a rule. And so if you look at people like Jeff Mielke, who wrote this book that features emerge, and he says, oh, here's rules that don't refer to natural classes. We don't need innate features. But he would use this example. He would use this example and say, look, it's not a natural class. What I would say is it's not a rule. And the problem is he has no theory of rules. So why should we believe him? He calls it a rule because in 1953, some missionary grammar called it a rule. And that's not a theory of rules. So it's better to be explicit and find out that there's things that you can't do and try to learn from that. And so maybe that will help us decide when something is, real, true allomorphy.
Okay, so, well, you are invited to our next talk because it's about polarity in phonology.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to announce it.
Oh, good.
Well, first of all, thank you, Charles. Please clap to Charles, los que estén aquí.
That's okay.
Thank you.
if your camera's off, you don't need to clap.
Okay, and well, we really thank you for your talk. This talk will be in YouTube, so we will try to show it to more people. And I don't know if people can write you if they have a doubt or something.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
You mentioned like academia, EDU, and ResearchGate. The best place is Lingbuzz for the most recent papers, and some of them some of them are getting published. Several of them have already been rejected, and I just got depressed and leave them alone. But you can read them anyway. But there's Kyle and I are supposed to be working on a big manuscript from this stuff, but we keep doing new things. But yeah, so look at Lingbuzz if you want to read about it and get in touch with me.
Okay, well, thank you. Y bueno, voy a hablar en español. Con esta sesión cerramos nuestras sesiones de 2025. Vamos a retomar el seminario en febrero de 2026, el próximo año. Y nuestro próximo invitado es Dominique Bobec, de la Universidad de Leipzig. Y hablará sobre vowel disharmony as polarity in MAM and beyond. Así que, bueno, me encantó que Charles cerrara con esto porque vamos a ver una posición contraria y Charles, you are invited to fight with Dominic if it's necessary. I'm just
and just Kyle is running a logical phonology workshop in New York. If you happen to be in New York on January 23rd and you have nothing better to do, then Kyle Gorman is doing one at the CUNY Grad Center. But I can send you the information, Carlos.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I receive it and I share it with the rest. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Okay, y pues bueno, gracias a todos. Nos vemos en febrero y sigue la invitación para el seminario permanente de análisis fónico. Si tienen alguna duda, pueden escribir a spafmex@gmail.com. Y pues nos vemos en 2026. Feliz Navidad a todos. Feliz Año Nuevo. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Feliz Navidad.
Gracias. Okay, bueno, pues hasta luego y muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Bye.
Ciao.
Recording stopped.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Gracias, Charles. Okay, pues. Bueno, gracias, Manuel. Gracias, Francisco. Gracias, Hugo. Nos vemos.
Nos vemos. Cuídense.
Bye.